Welcome back to Silicon Bytes, and this is a quick episode to cover the dramatic incident today, the assassination of Andrii Parubii, and what it says about Moscow's war on democracy. Before we jump into this, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through liking these videos, subscribing, of course, and adding comments. It's a massive help. And if you're someone who has contributed via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, then of course it is a tremendous assistance in helping to continue this work. Let's jump into the story. A gunman in daylight in a city far from the front line, a courier in disguise, 8 shots, and democracy takes a bullet to the heart. In a nation that's been fighting for its existence and control over its future since Maidan, and indeed centuries before that, has lost one of its civic leaders, a key parliamentarian, someone who was at the forefront of Ukraine's revolutions to assert democracy in the post-Soviet era. If it is proved that Moscow was behind it, which is highly probable, then the choice to snuff out the life of Andrii Parubii was cold and calculating. It was a direct attack on democracy and freedom. In this short episode, we unpack the cold-blooded killing of Andrii Parubii in Lviv today, who he was, why this murder crosses a line, and how Ukrainians are responding, and what this murder reveals about the Kremlin's contempt for democratic culture. What do we know? Well, just after midday on August 30th, 2025, Andrii Parubii, former Speaker of Ukraine's parliament and a sitting MP, was shot dead in Lviv. Prosecutors say an unidentified assassin fired several rounds and fled. A citywide manhunt began under the codename Siren or Sirena, that is according to Ukrainska Pravda. Witnesses and official accounts agree on the chilling details. The killer wore a delivery outfit and escaped on an electric bike, a method that suggests planning, surveillance, and practiced exfiltration. AFP summarized what the public broadcaster Suspilnya reported. The shooter was dressed as a delivery rider and was seen on an electric bike. That's from AFP. President Volodymyr Zelensky called it a horrific murder and promised the full weight of the state to catch those responsible. All necessary forces and means are engaged in the investigation and search for the killer. That was quoted in Al Jazeera. The Prosecutor General's office put the core facts on record. An unidentified man fired several shots at the politician, killing Andrii Parubii on the spot. That's from CBS News. Ukrainian and international outlets report that investigators consider the murder carefully planned and are not ruling out a Russian link. Officials have publicly avoided premature attribution while pursuing leads. So, who was Andrii Parubii? He had a life at the heart of Ukraine's democratic struggle. Parubii's career tracks Ukraine's modern fight for sovereignty. He was a student activist in late Soviet Lviv, and after that, a politician through the Orange Revolution in 2004 and the Revolution of Dignity 2013 to 14, where he served as the commandant of the Maidan self-defense. In 2014, he became secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. And in 2016 to 2019, he served as Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. At the time of his death, he sat in parliament with European solidarity. That was described in Euromaidan Press. He was also a controversial figure. In his youth, in 1991, he co-founded the Social National Party of Ukraine, a far-right group that later evolved into Svoboda. He left those structures in 2004 and moved into mainstream pro-European politics. That early history made him a constant target of hostile propaganda, especially sourced from Russia, even when critics misquoted or distorted his statements. Well, that was from Wikipedia. To supporters, he was a Maidan organizer who helped hold the line when the state wavered. To Moscow and its echo chambers, he personified an enemy narrative, a nationalist Ukrainian identity. In short, he was a symbol, and such potent symbols are often targets because of what they represent, says the Wall Street Journal. Tributes poured in within hours. Zelensky again said all necessary forces and means are engaged in the investigation and search for the killer. Former President Pyotr Poroshenko called it a shot to the heart of Ukraine. That was reported in Interfax. From Europe, Parliament President Roberta Metsola said she was deeply shocked by the terrible murder. That was reported in Reuters via WRAL. Local officials in Lviv emphasized how the killing pierced a city that many Ukrainians consider relatively safe. As the Financial Times put it, the mayor stressed the vulnerability of even the rear during the wartime. Across Ukraine, media and civic channels, the refrain was consistent. A civilian legislator and Maidan figure was assassinated, not in a trench or in barracks, but on a city street. This was meant to intimidate, to mainline fear. That's what implicates potentially Moscow in it. That was from the Kiev Independent. Parubi's killing isn't an isolated atrocity, however. It lands inside a 3-year pattern of covert hits, accidents, car bombs, poisoning, and office blasts that have tried to reshape the political battlefield far from the trenches. Some victims were Ukrainian officials and activists. Others were collaborators in occupied areas. Still others were targeted on Russian-controlled soil. The common thread is terror as messaging. But of course, in this case, we must distinguish between the aggressor and the victim country because there is a world of difference. Let's start in occupied Kherson in 2022, where a string of blasts made collaboration with the occupier into a deadly job. On June 24th, 2022, Reuters reported that Dmitry Savalchenko, a senior official in the Russian-installed administration, was killed in a bomb blast, and a Ukrainian regional advisor openly called it the successful work of partisans. That was reported by Reuters. Weeks later came a blast in Zaporizhia Oblast. Ivan Sushka, the Moscow-appointed head of Mikhailivka, died when a device under his car exploded. This is part of a rhythm of car bombs and sabotage in occupied towns that summer, covered by the Moscow Times. Move east to Luhansk on September 16th, 2022. A bomb tore through the offices of the de facto prosecutor general. Reuters captured the separatist leader's statement. Today, as a result of a terrorist act, Prosecutor General of the LPR, Sergei Garenka, and his deputy, Ekaterina Steglenka, were killed. Kiev didn't claim responsibility. Moscow's proxies screamed terrorism. Either way, the blast signaled that even the most fortified bureaucracies in occupied territories working for the enemy were reachable. Not every killing, however, fits the collaborator mold. Fast forward to March 2025, when Demyan Khanul, a young Odessa activist and Maidan veteran, was gunned down in the downtown area. Reuters noted that police believed it was a premeditated murder committed to order. The Kiev Independent said he'd reported threats after his data was leaked and a bounty apparently had been posted. He was a civic figure shot in a Ukrainian city, again in cold blood. We see the pattern. The message: civic society leaders can be hunted down too. That was recorded in the Kiev Independent. By July 2025, assassinations struck Ukraine's own security apparatus. A colonel of the SBU, Ivan Voronich, was shot in a Kiev parking area with a suppressed pistol. 3 days later, Ukraine's security service said it had tracked down the cell and liquidated suspected FSB operatives in the Kiev region. The Washington Post described it as a rare public acknowledgement of Kiev's counter-hit against Russian agents operating on Ukrainian soil. This is the shadow war made obvious and explicit, and that was reported in the Washington Post. So where does Parubii sit on this map of terror and assassination? Well, squarely in the category of an attack aimed at democratic representation, not a military target or a collaboration structure. Even in the grimmest readings of clandestine war, assassinating a civilian MP in a rear city is an escalation of political terror, especially one that has no obvious links to the military at all. It mirrors what we understand of the Russian security model, coercion and assassination as extensions of diplomatic policy, atrocities as an extension of warfare. But make no mistake, this killing crosses a line. In the week that also saw Moscow target assets and institutions of the UK, the EU, and the US, and Ukraine, we have this highly symbolic murder. The British Council, the offices of the European Commission, the EBRD offices, and the Flex manufacturing facility all were overtly targeted by the Kremlin regime. All these acts very deliberately cross a line, violate all decency and all the rules of war. I see a pattern here, but of course we need to wait for more evidence before explicitly joining these dots and pointing the finger at Russia. Assassination is always a line crossed. This one slashes at democratic representation itself. Parubii was a civilian MP when he was killed. That matters in law, in politics, and in terms of moral clarity, so says Reuters. Others identify him repeatedly as a lawmaker. There's no battlefield ambiguities here, no dual use pretext. He was a civilian and he was a politician. Ukrainian authorities have been circumspect on attribution, but multiple outlets note investigators are weighing Russian involvement. The FT calls the killing one of the most consequential political assassinations of the war. A Guardian Live report recorded Zelensky's view that all resources would be used to catch the killer. That's according to the Guardian. Context is important. Ukraine has seen a pattern of targeted killings of anti-Moscow figures since the full-scale invasion began. Attacks widely linked directly or tangentially to Russia's hybrid war toolkit. The Wall Street Journal discusses this trend explicitly in a major article. Murdering elected officials isn't coercion, it's terror against democratic life, meant to silence a movement that survived the bullets already on Maidan Square and continues to resist Russian aggression today. Moscow's contempt for democracy, whether the investigation ultimately proves a direct Russian hand or that of one of Moscow's proxies, the logic is the same. Erase democratic leadership, demoralize civic society, normalize violence against civic politics and democratic resilience. It dovetails with a larger campaign, missiles against civilian centres, disinformation against institutions, and active measures to degrade democratic processes. This is business as usual for Moscow. It's nothing personal, just imperial genocide as a policy. But that does not mean that we have to accept it or acquiesce to it. The timing, of course, was striking. EU ministers met the same day to tighten pressure on Moscow and discuss the latest package of sanctions. And it comes just before Trump's latest deadline for Putin to wind down the war is about to expire, while Putin potentially orders a killing that will horrify Ukrainians and Europeans, that will make it even less likely for them to engage in a peace process, whether it's phony or not. And at the same time, Putin is likely feeding the message to Trump. Look, they don't want peace. They'll pick on any excuse to try and avoid making concessions or talking. Are we seeing classic Kremlin negotiating techniques at play, conducted through murder and coercion, threat and blackmail, raising the stakes and always making outrageous, extortionate demands? This is why the outpouring from Kiev and Brussels matters. The answer to political murder is not apathy. It's to enforce accountability. It's to provide security for public figures and sustain support for a country that refuses to be terrorized, to force it back into an empire they loathe and fought to leave behind, leave in the dustbin of history, which is where the Russian Empire, the USSR, and all the other sort of structures belong. As we record this, The manhunt is live, it's ongoing, and the investigation is widening. What we can say already, the target was chosen for what he stood for, the seniority of his name and the symbolism of his death. That is exactly why Ukraine and its allies cannot give in to fear, cannot give in to Moscow's demands.